Now, personally speaking, the Ford Territory isn't exactly my favorite crossover in the market, or the world even, because quite frankly, the old 1.5 turbo and the transmission that happens to be attached to it was quite frankly. But what we have here is the hybrid Territory, and we're gonna see if it's actually any good, because after all, the biggest complaint I had of it, of the outgoing version at least, was the entire powertrain, and quite frankly, it just spoiled the entire experience. But hopefully, the shift to electrification makes everything better, and who knows, probably at the end of this video, it might actually be one of my recommendations. So behind the wheel of the Ford Territory Hybrid, and here are a couple of things I noticed about it. Now, one, it's not a totally exciting car to drive. It's either that or I came from a pretty good chassis, a pretty sporty car before I hopped into this one, so maybe I'll admit my body's a little bit more used to that one. But still, probably like 90-95% of the demographic who's gonna buy these things won't care if it's sporty or not. What they care more about is it like to drive? Is it agreeable? Are the pedals like nice and firm? Does it ride well? In terms of ride, I will admit there's a little bit of oscillation over at the back when you're going over sine wave roads, but it's not too bad. It's not as bad as some of we've experienced before, but there's a little bit of that here. It's a bit softly sprung, but on the flip side, that means it rides really rather comfortably. But what's interesting about this car is, despite the soft suspension, is the handling still feels safe and secure. Again, not exciting, but you know, there is confidence that you're not gonna skid off the road or any of that, or it doesn't feel like it's on tippy toes. A little bit more excitement perhaps for those who want, or who are more on the enthusiastic side of driving, but other than that, you know, this would be a totally agreeable daily driver. Another thing that I would note, aside from the slight oscillation at the back and, you know, the general lack of driving excitement, is the turning circle. It's not that great in here, if I'm honest. It's actually pretty big, and the Territory itself isn't a narrow car, so you have to take note of that when you're in tight spots, or you have to do 3-point turns. Sometimes it's going to be a 4-point or 5-point turn to get out of a tight spot. So it's a bit understandable because the steering itself is actually pretty quick. It's not overly communicative, the steering, but you know, the steering is sharp. There is sharpness to it. Turns in well, stuff like that. But again, most of its target demographic won't care about things I just said about. What I will say, however, is that this Territory Hybrid banishes all of the mistakes and the sins of the old 1.5 turbo. Now, the 1.5 turbo was, to be honest, and to be quite frank about it, unlikable for me. The turbo lag could be measured with a calendar. The pedal feel was never consistent, whether it was the brakes or the throttle. The dual clutch transmission was one of the jerkiest we've ever experienced, and it just didn't feel right because the transmission was so confused all the time, and the engine just, you know, didn't know when to spool up those turbos, so it just felt like you always had delayed controls, and electrification just totally erased all of that. The response is more consistent. It's quicker. It's also, you know, the pedal feel here in this car, it feels like I'm driving a naturally aspirated vehicle. The brake pedal feel in particular is very commendable because it's not jerky like you'd experience in some hybrids. It's actually a bit on the progressive side, and it's quiet, it's smooth, and you know, it's a far less stressful thing to drive compared to the old 1.5 turbo. It just feels so much nicer because you're not annoyed by all the delays and response and braking and shifting. This is what the Territory should have been from the get-go. And I'm so glad they finally got rid of that old 1.5 turbo, and I won't miss it for one bit. Thank God it finally got this hybrid powertrain, because the talents of this chassis, this platform, its smoothness, its handling, it was totally overshadowed by that poor powertrain. And I'm sorry for all those who had to buy the 1.5 turbo. If you ask me, go straight to your Ford dealership and just ask for a trade-in. Just get one of these as soon as you can, because it is a total night and day difference. It is a 180 transformation for the Territory. Now back then, if people told me they wanted a Territory, I mean, I won't stop them if they really wanted one, but I'd sort of encourage them to try literally everything else except this one. But now, I would tell them to go for a test drive and see for themselves if they like it. Because so far behind the wheel, it's been great. Not exciting again, but as a daily runaround, this is totally agreeable. And now for the exterior design, obviously these lights are totally new. Actually, the entire front fascia is new. So these LEDs, they run from the corner here, connected by this light bar in the center, all the way to the other side. Now, something that's very interesting here is that the Ford logo lights up. Seems to be a thing these days. And surely Ford could have cut some costs there by actually not illuminating it, but here we are. Now, the lower end of the bumper, it's smoother and more rounded out than before, probably for aerodynamics. It should help the hybrid cost of this vehicle. And the color itself, it's an interesting shade of green. Now, personally, I think green should be an option in more cars. It's not a very common color choice these days, and I do wish we see more of them. Now, moving on to the wheels. Now, these wheels are for the Titanium X. These are 19 inches, but regardless of which variant you choose, you get a different wheel design now. Well, for the Titanium at least, these are 19s with a totally new pattern. Now, the rest of the body is carried over unchanged from before, although I will admit that this hybrid stamp right here, I don't know if that's necessary, and it comes off as, people might think, oh, he just slapped hybrid stickers on his Territory to be coding exempt, but I'm honestly not too sure about that. Maybe a smaller badge would have been better, but I don't know, it's just screaming a little bit too much, for me at least. Now, over to the back, where we just came from, actually, it's gonna look very, very familiar. Now, the taillights themselves have a bit of a smoked effect this time around, and the badges are in gloss black instead of chrome. Now, it's gonna look very familiar again, and the only hybrid differentiator here is this little badge here. Now, I wish this badge is what they applied on the door instead of slapping that huge hybrid sticker there, but maybe it's just to let everyone know that this is an electrified Territory, and at least from the back, just to tell people that, hey, this is a slightly different version of the popular crossover. Now, before we move on to the interior, I forgot to mention one thing, because there's just so much to say about how the hybrid powertrain just changed everything with the Territory. Now, there's no manual override, there's no manual-matic mode, you don't get paddle shifters, and you don't even get the traditional Prindle. You get this dial instead, and when you're going downhill, of course, you have to go into lower gear. So in this case, you press L. Unfortunately, it's not very effective. We came from a lot of downhill sections recently, and it's just not very effective. We were still rolling downhill pretty quickly, and it forced me to step on the brakes a couple of times. So I wish it had more. It had a more aggressive low gear, especially when we consider that it's a hybrid. It's supposed to have a more aggressive regen, but in low gear in this case, it just doesn't do a very great job. You were just, I wish I could just leave it in low when going downhill, but no, you still have to control it with the brakes fairly often. But anyway, moving on to the interior. So drastic change for the powertrain, not so much for the interior. Still has this wide screen display here that houses both the instrumentation and the infotainment system. Materials still feel about the same, although you do get green stitching to emphasize that this is indeed a greener model. It's a hybrid. But other than that, still very familiar, which also means I'm not a huge fan of this panel right here. Now, this is for your climate control, your automatic climate control. And they have a haptic touch bar here. I do wish it was a set of buttons instead. Same goes for the screen. The screen itself, it's fairly easy to use naman, but your climate control is here, your seat temperature is here. Yes, this does come with butt chillers. But again, would have been easier if it was easily accessible with the buttons here. I mean, there are a couple of blank switches here, and looking at a couple of the options here, like the camera display, the seat coolers, I wish they could have just moved it here, just to make everything easier. Now for the features of the infotainment system. It's what you expect from just about everyone these days, if I'm being honest. Vehicle settings, you got vehicle information, your tire pressure monitoring, etc, etc. You can even change your ambient lighting and something called body settings, so that's really more for your lights. So that's for your follow me home light, so that's how long your lights stay on when you turn off the ignition. Interior light, interestingly, it takes 5 minutes to turn off, so I'm just gonna... Okay, it doesn't give me the option, it just says energy saving 5 minutes. Okay, interesting. But you know, the screen itself, it moves fast enough. Not the flashiest screen, which is fine. Keeps things nice and simple. And yeah, processing speeds are fairly okay. Now for the cabin materials, it's got soft touch materials right on the door cards. The middle section is hard plastic, although your hands rarely go there. At least the middle part of the door panel is nice and squishy. Okay, it's not totally squishy, but it's soft enough. Now onto the dash fascia, it's still nice and soft touch materials, and not much in the way of squeaks and rattles. That's actually good when it comes to build quality. Good job, Ford, there. Now for other storage spaces, you have your pad right here. This is also a wireless charging pad, although my opinion on wireless charging is they're not very effective. They just heat up your phone, if I'm going to be blunt about it. Now, if you want more storage space, you have to be double jointed and access them down here for your USB ports. There's a USB-C and a USB-A port, and there's extra storage for larger items. Not that you'll need that all the time because the center console itself is massive, and it even comes with this sliding tray, so you can either cover up the rest of the console box, or you can move that back so you get easier access. Look how deep that thing is. So yeah, pretty practical here at the front. I would prefer that the USB-C ports would be placed up here instead of down here, because yeah, you're gonna need 2 joints on your wrist to reach and plug in some things, or to reach some items that you've placed down here. Now, other features, you have a huge panoramic sunroof, like in the old Titanium X. Nice glossy materials here, although it's going to be a bit of a fingerprint magnet. But we're going to see if also the sun visors extend. No, they do not extend. So there is that. So for the front end, still pretty much the same. I wish there were a couple of ergonomic improvements, but other than that, you know, it's not too disagreeable. Again, more buttons inside. The Japanese and the Koreans are doing that right. The rest of the world, guys, please, we prefer physical buttons. So that's the front end covered. Let's go over to the back. Now, you know, a car was primarily designed for the Chinese market if it's got huge back seats, and that's totally the case here in the territory. Now, it's the same as the previous ICE-powered model, so not much to report here, aside from the fact that there's acres of legroom, and despite having a panoramic sunroof, it's got stacks of headroom as well. Now, the backrests of the seats are unfortunately fixed, but you can't really be choosy about it, given its price, which we'll get to a little bit later. Now, this is also a true 5-seat vehicle. It's not like 4.5 or in the middle bit is slightly squished. You can actually genuinely fit 5 people at the back of a territory, as I will now demonstrate. And because this also got a flat floor in the middle, they're also going to be pretty comfy here in the center as well. Now for the rest of the things here at the back, same soft squidgy materials as in the front, and you have a fair bit of door storage as well. Now, they won't exactly fit tall tumblers, unfortunately, but, you know, maybe for smaller cans, smaller tumblers, it's totally okay. Now, you have a pair of USB-C ports here at the back as well, and we have the all-important rear AC vents. Now, as a 5-seater, this is hugely effective. Again, stacks of legroom, headroom, shoulder room, and even hip room here at the back, and of course it has ISOFIX mounts if you have little children on board with you with their child seats. Armrest, it stays in place and you get a pair of extra cup holders to go along with it. And in this top of the line Titanium X model, you get two-tone leather with black on sort of grayish, light gray color with, like in the front, green stitching. Alright, so that's the back seats covered. What about the important cargo area? Now technically, This is a subcompact crossover, but dimensionally, it's more of a compact crossover. So the cargo area in this is actually, if I'm being honest, quite huge. Now, whoever designed the floor to window area of this actually did a pretty great job, because it is absolutely massive here vertically. I mean, I can even, for reference, put my daughter's cart right here, and it's not gonna hit the parcel area. That's actually quite impressive. And you know, it's a huge rectangular shape. It's probably among its peers one of the biggest in its segment. And if you have loose items, you can put them right here on each side, just so they won't like flop around in the main floor. Now the main floor itself, again, it's nice and rectangular, and there's interestingly better width utilization than length utilization. That's not to say it's actually a tight cargo area. It's still a huge space nonetheless, but maybe a few more inches of length would make this an absolutely cavernous cargo area. And I'm gonna remove this in the meantime for our spare tire check. So let's go a little closer. Are we gonna be disappointed? We are not going to be disappointed, because there is a spare. It's a space saver spare. It's about this long only, but still, a spare is a spare, and that is very important, especially in our road conditions. Now, I've said this earlier, but I still can't believe I'm saying this, but the Territory is now a crossover I'd actually gladly recommend to people. Now, for those who are asking, is it why the decision? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the transformation is a complete 180. It went from having one of the worst powertrains in its class and one of the worst transmissions in its class to, well, one of the smoothest and one of the nicest and most pleasurable to drive. Now, the fuel efficiency is also a huge bonus. Now, remember, as I mentioned during the driving impressions, you were lucky to get 6.5 in this thing, and now it'll effortlessly do 13-14 kilometers per liter. And I'm sure for those with lighter feet can get much better economy figures from it. And it actually looks better than before. I mean, the older one, I wouldn't call it an oil painting, but it's one of the more handsome looking ones in its segment. So now the enhancements made to this design, it's made it a neater and cleaner package. Although I really just don't like the hybrid decal on the rear doors. And so with that, we're gonna move on to our pros and cons. So the pros, definitely the fuel efficiency, and of course, the entire powertrain. So that's engine, electric system, and the transmission. Huge 180. And I can't believe, again, I'm actually praising the powertrain of a Territory. Now, another would definitely be its performance. Now, obviously, it's not a hot hatchback, but, because of how well integrated the entire hybrid system is, it just, again, transforms the entire Territory. And, it gets off the line well, and even, acceleration-wise and, pulling power in between, it's great. It's fantastic even. Another thing would be the handling. It's not exactly what I would call totally engaging, but it's safe, it's secure. It just won't scare off any the amateur driver. And for those who are looking for a little bit more pleasure, maybe that's for another day. Now, the interior space is another pro of this car, and as well as features. So it's fully loaded, it's got advanced driver tech, it's got a huge panoramic sunroof, and the passenger space, it's got brilliant space utilization, legroom for days, and because this body is so wide, it is a true 5-seater. And I'm also going to say another pro for the cargo area. I wish it was a bit longer, but because of the width and the general shape of the cargo area, it's also hugely, hugely practical. Now for the cons, well, I did mention this a couple of times already. I wish it provided a little bit more fun behind the wheel. A little bit more feel and feedback through the steering wheel would be welcome in the Territory. Not that it's a totally bad thing, and it's not that 90% of its demographic would even care, but just so I know where the front wheels are pointed. Second would be the ride at the back. Not to say it's terrible, but there's a fair bit of oscillation going on at the back. It's not as terrible as, say, having dead shock absorbers, but you do notice it when you're going on wavy roads. Now, 3 on the con side would be a little bit on the ergonomics. I'm not a fan of haptic touch panels. I do prefer buttons. I do prefer hard buttons over a touch panel. Might take some getting used to. I also wish that there would be more physical controls over everything in the touchscreen. And lastly, the low gear in this vehicle. It's not the most effective. We found ourselves going downhill a lot. And even if I press low, it feels like we were just zooming downhill. So a more aggressive low gear for this one, especially the fact that there's no manual override in the transmission. Still, those are relatively minor faults, especially when you consider the price. Now, the Territory Hybrid retails for less than 1.5 million pesos, and you can even get an entry-level version that goes for even less. If anything, it's less expensive than the outgoing gas-powered models, and that also makes this quite huge when it comes to its value proposition. So if we were going to rate the Territory Hybrid, again, I can't believe I'm saying this. This gets a 9 out of 10. It's a huge jump from the old 6 I gave it before.